This video discusses the next step of your research project, which is selecting your sources and taking notes, creating a research log. You've already begun your research, so you're familiar with how many different kinds of sources there are, whether newspaper articles or encyclopedias or videos. Here's a list of a few different kinds of sources that would work as scholarly sources for this paper that you're writing. Encyclopedias are often a good place to start your research. Then you'll want to start narrowing down and finding sources that can give you a little bit more in-depth look at whatever you are researching. So academic journals are a good possibility. Oftentimes you can find these on electronic databases, actually, which is what we've been using so far for the most part. So these databases would include things like World History in Context and Culturegrams, which are great sources to point you to information that you might use, particularly World History in Context, which has so many different video and primary and secondary options from which you can learn more about your topic. Books are obviously going to be a great resource as well. And in addition, the library also has a resource by which you can do a web search, and it helps filter out articles that might be unhelpful and helps you to point you toward articles that will be more helpful and more scholarly. We'll talk about that a little bit later in class. So one thing that we haven't talked a lot about this year, but we should have, is the difference between a primary and a secondary source. So what's the difference between them? Well, a primary source is the testimony or the witness of someone who actually was present at an event or lived through it. So that might include someone's diary entry, a journal, perhaps a speech that someone wrote. It could also include a map or an oral history, an interview that someone might have given at a particular time. It could include video footage, a radio address. Any of those might be a primary source. A secondary source is something that was written by someone who was not present at the event but is analyzing a variety of primary sources. So they might be looking at speeches or maps or video, etc. And they're analyzing those sources and they're writing a history or a story. They're helping to interpret what happened in that past event. And so a great example of a secondary source would just be your textbook, which describes different events that have happened in the past. And it's also a great example because it oftentimes refers to primary sources in that secondary source. Other examples might be a journal article or encyclopedia. In your paper, you're required to use 2 primary sources and 2 secondary sources. So as you're doing your research, make sure that you're collecting some of both to help support your thesis. Now once you find your sources, you'll want to start writing down some notes as you read them. To help facilitate that process, we're asking you to keep a research log. On the screen here, you can see an example of the format that we're asking you to use for your research log. So why should you take notes as you read? Well, the main reason is so that when you're actually writing your paper, you have the information that you need in a condensed format so that you don't have to search through your various books or internet articles, etc. in order to find the information that you need. You'll already have your information, your data ready and nearby so that you can just simply write your paper and insert that information into your paper. Because you need to cite the various sources that you use in your paper, it's very helpful to do that as you go along and as you read so that you don't have to do that at the very end. It'll make the process a lot easier. So what should you write down? Well, it's helpful to write down data and facts and numbers and information that you're not going to remember as you read, but that will be really helpful to proving your thesis. Additionally, sometimes it's very useful in writing to use quotations, either from primary sources or secondary sources, and those can be very helpful in helping to prove your thesis. So you'll occasionally want to write down some quotes, some very strong quotes that will help you prove your thesis. So here are 2 examples that I did using this format of the research log. So note at the one at the top, I used World History in Context. That was the database. I wrote the article title, the author, the date, and then the bibliographic information actually was at the bottom of the article, so it made it really easy, I just wrote it down. And so when I would go and later make my bibliography, it would be really easy to do using that bibliographic information. This particular source is a secondary source, and it describes the significance of a massacre that happened during the 1990s Bosnian War. And notice how strong this quotation is. It's why I wrote it down. The Srebrenica massacre is the worst event of its kind in Europe since the Holocaust of World War II. It was certainly the most dire event of the Bosnian War and has been designated as genocide by the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. This is a very strong quotation, and it shows why this event is important. Now note the source at the bottom. It's actually a primary source, but I listed it as both primary and secondary, in this case because there's also some commentary from someone who wasn't present at this event. However, it's a fascinating interview from a man who helped discover the killing in Srebrenica, the mass graves that were there. And so I've listed all of the information I could find, the database, the article title, the date. I didn't know exactly what to do for the author, and there's going to be some cases in which maybe you are not sure what to do or what to write down. That's okay. Do the best you can. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll try to do my best to help. However, you also have a great source in the trusty Bedford Handbook, and it will help you to know how to write down the bibliographic information for a variety of sources, and you can find that in pages 701 to 713. So good luck as you start your research and as you work on your research log, and of course if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.